The property dispute between him and his neighbors had reached boiling point. If there could be no amicable agreement, he would have to put a stop to it himself once and for all. They'd tested his patience for the last time. If his neighbors drove on his property again, they were going to seriously regret it. In a small private neighborhood, a good-natured police officer was at the end of his tether with fellow residents regarding the road they all shared. He and his neighbors, who were all distantly related, had been locked in a bitter battle for decades. But this was about to go down as the argument to end all arguments. The crux of the ongoing drama centered around the gravel road. According to his neighbors, the cop and his wife were obligated to pay for it to be asphalted, but he refused to cough up. "Everyone here is a complete nut job," said the police officer's daughter, who couldn't remember a time when the neighbors weren't in dispute with her father. She begged him to find a way to end the drama. Trying to appease the ill-tempered residents, the cop offered up a 3-square-foot plot on the corner of his land to make the turn around the property easier on drivers as they navigated the tricky gravel road. But despite the goodwill, the neighbors threw it right back in his face, sparking a fresh feud that would end in destruction. Since relinquishing the land, the man watched in horror as drivers swerved dangerously closer to his property, often knocking down his fence and destroying his plants. After replanting the shrubbery and mending the fence for a third time after a truck crashed into it, the police officer vowed to protect his castle with something far stronger, no matter what the neighbors thought of it. No one seemed to mind when the officer stationed a series of barrels around the plot of land he'd allowed them to drive on. It was his property after all. But while they looked like innocent plastic barrels on the surface, the neighbors would soon discover there was more to them than met the eye. One morning, the officer was awoken by a loud banging at the door. His neighbor was furious that he'd driven into one of the heavy rock-filled barrels and damaged his car, threatening the startled cop with a pickaxe to the back. Knowing the law, the cop simply informed him that the barrels were on his land, but his plan soon hit a snag. Despite the huge deterrent, the officer found that so many drivers were hitting the barrels that they eventually split and became useless. Going back to the drawing board, he contemplated various methods of deterring the erratic drivers for good. Then one night, he set about laying something that would earn him the respect he deserved. The first neighbor on his way home that night was calmly driving around the road as usual. He knew the police officer let people cut across his property, so he swung his car around generously, not caring about the freshly laid flower bed under the wheels. The next thing he knew, the driver found himself in a heated conversation with his insurance company. The disrespected driver had happened upon the police officer's new solution to fence-racking neighbors: a small concrete wall hidden under an attractive flower bed right on the corner of his land. It was working. The crafty cop's neighbors couldn't destroy any more of his property, although it took them a while to catch on before the matter was dropped completely. A total of 5 neighbors wrecked their vehicles on the perfectly legal wall. Not having a leg to stand on, drivers eventually learned to steer clear of the property and stop knocking on the police officer's door to complain. But one particularly angry neighbor escalated matters further, sending lawyers to snoop around the troubled street. Some neighbors seriously damaged their vehicles, leading to insurance claims that required the cop to prove that what he'd done was perfectly legal. Of course, he'd done his due diligence and could quickly show lawyers that he'd done the right thing. Would you go to these lengths to protect your property, or is this a step too far?